I think it is obvious that most people who love X-Men want certain things from X-Men. I think it's also kind of obvious, or let's say it should be obvious, that Marvel hasn't really handled X-Men as they should. There might be some exciting news coming. Now, what this means for what it should mean for X-Men is a course correct in a right direction. You know, I've covered X-Men Elsewhen here on this channel. I've been reading through those books, which hopefully I'm going to get to reading through another one of those books because they are good. I'm glad that John Byrne did this. And if you know anything about it, then you know he really put some effort into this. This was just something he loved and wanted to do. And typically when you do things like that, or any creator to do something like that, it's typically going to turn out good because they're putting their all into this. So this is something I heard about yesterday and I was like, oh, this is good. So John Byrne, X-Men Elsewhen, finally coming to Marvel Comics. Now, this is kind of speculation. It's not really, it's not guaranteed that this is going to happen. He mentioned something and this might be what's coming. So back in 2018, John Byrne began work on a new X-Men comic book, but just for himself and his fans. Now, I don't know if this article is going to get into this. I didn't read it in advance. I don't think it started out that way. I think it started out as something he was actually doing or going to do for Marvel, and that deal kind of fell through. And I believe he was excited about this and said, well, screw it. I'm just going to do this myself. It was called X-Men Elsewhen. And the idea was that it would pick up from the moment John Byrne left the X-Men comic book and would follow how he might have written and drawn it going on if he had his druthers. Now, here's the thing. I don't think it's if. I think if I understand it correctly, this was actually the plan John Byrne had from the beginning, like out the gate. This is always what he planned for X-Men Elsewhen, as far as my my understanding goes. Let's see. And he wrote and drew quite a lot of it for free. Posted it posted in lettered, penciled online on the fan fic section of the John Byrne robotic forum. One of the few comic creator focused message boards still going. He let some of his fans have a go at inking it if they wanted. And just the pencils itself, without even any ink, I was like very astonished. I think John Byrne, how old is John Byrne? I think this man is in his like mid 70s. Let's see how old he is. John Byrne. Because this, like what he did with this book, especially at his age, he's 75 years old. 75 years old and still drawing like this. As I said before, I think Marvel needs to take advantage of some of these veterans still being alive. And I think they really need to use this stuff. They really need to use these dudes to their advantage and maybe get some of these veterans to train and work with some of these young kids just to get them spooled up. I'm not saying you got to be John Byrne. I'm not saying someone has to draw like John Byrne. But clearly at 75, if he can still put in, he did 34 issues. I want to say, and I think this article might be wrong. I think it was actually like the end of 2019 through like 2021 or something like that. But maybe I'm mistaken. Anyway, it says fanfic, as C.B. Cebulski was made editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, there was talk of Marvel approaching John to publish it officially. However, for reasons that John Byrne seems unwilling to discuss, that did not, I guess, did not happen. He wrote, "Let loose the dogs of war, and no speculation on why I decided not to take this to Marvel." And the story continued month in, month out, including a very different origin of Wolverine as Byrne would have had it. To date, he has completed 32 issues by 2022. Okay, so it's 2022 he was finished. And look, there's no telling what happened, how, like, what went on behind the scenes. I know Rob Liefeld has had his problems with Marvel Comics, and I don't know, what Marvel's, well, I guess you can kind of look and see what Marvel's priorities are if you look at the things they're putting out. But I think Marvel needs to, I think it is imperative to them to prioritize some of these creators like this, especially while they're still with us. I mean, Chris Claremont is still here. John Byrne is still here and still creating. I think there's a somewhat of a cultural issue where people want to disregard those that came before them. There's a lot of people, geeks, artists, in whatever respect, that came before me that I can't just disregard. I may disagree. Maybe they say something and I'm like, I don't know, I agree with that, but I can't disregard what they say. And when you have people like this still around that can kind of hone the skills of some of the young people coming up, man, this needs to be taken advantage of, because there's too much disregard for elders. Look, wisdom comes with age, and there's a lot of pitfalls and a lot of mistakes that some of these companies could avoid if they really tap the knowledge base of some of these elders. I think that should happen. Okay, as C.B. Cebulski was made editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, there was talk of Marvel approaching John to publish it officially. However, for reasons that John Byrne seems unwilling to discuss, that did not, I already wrote that. I don't know why I read that over again. Anyway, last October, he wrote, "I may soon have some relative big news about Elsewhen. Feel free to foam at the mouth." Soon is a relative term, of course, and yesterday he posted that big news I mentioned Thursday. Enough said. And I believe there's going to be an X-Men panel. I think it mentions it here at San Diego Comic-Con, which is the pinnacle of geekdom. Like, as you could say whatever you want about the geek, culture right now, where it's headed, San Diego Comic-Con, as far as comics, is still the pinnacle. Now, I believe there are other, let's say, I think there's some things encroaching on San Diego Comic-Con's territory as far as impact, but make no mistake about it, San Diego Comic-Con is still the con of cons. I think everybody would agree on that. Thursday in San Diego Comic-Con, Thursday is the big X-Men panel at San Diego Comic-Con. Might Marvel have an announcement that they are to publish X-Men Elsewhen, inked and colored, either for the panel or before then? Or might John Byrne be doing some other X-Men work for Marvel Comics? Decades after his original run, his hidden years, or his Jim Lee era collaboration, not long until Thursday, will John Byrne be on the panel? Now, I don't know if he'll be there, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I know if they can get John Byrne to do some work on X-Men, like, I'll tell you personally what I think, and I might have said this before. I think personally John Byrne needs to be over X-Men. He needs to guide X-Men into what it needs to be. However they need to put him in charge, I think he needs to be in charge of everything. Personally, right now especially, to get X-Men on track. X-Men is my favorite comic book team. As of late, they've had some books that really haven't attracted me. I won't get into that too much and harp on that. You know, I could be here all day if I did that. But X-Men Elsewhen, look, I've read a few issues. I haven't read all of them. I have them all, downloaded and, compiled into CBZ files. But man, is it good. I'm telling you, it is good. Best X-Men I've read in, 20 plus years. Like, no kidding. It is good stuff. I think, this is what I think. If they allow John Byrne to take over X-Men, and especially put this X-Men work out, I would not be surprised, shocked at all, if this becomes the top selling comic book, at least while he's at the helm.